In these perilous times, see from current events how biblical prophecy is coming to pass in front of our eyes. You're watching In the Last Days, the program that looks at Israel and the end times with teaching from a Hebraic perspective. With Martin and Natalie Blackham, thank you to our friends and partners who make this program possible. Now, here's Martin and Natalie.
Hi, welcome to the In the Last Days television program with myself, Martin Blackham. Natalie is behind the scenes today, but she says hello to you. Great to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining us. This is the program that looks at Israel. We look at the news and features from Israel, and we have a very special guest in the studio today, Rabbi Aharon Leibowitz. So thank you so much, Rabbi Aharon, for coming across today from Jerusalem. We really appreciate that. Rabbi Aharon is very busy in the Jerusalem Council, so we appreciate you giving your time to come and speak to us.
My pleasure.
And we're going to learn from Rabbi Aharon a bit about his background and also about the Jerusalem Council and lots of other things, so you're not going to want to miss any of it, so let your friends know. Don't forget you can always email us if you've got questions at info@inthelastdays.com. So Rabbi Aharon Leibowitz is originally from California and is the founder and director of Sulam Yaakov Yeshiva, which prepares students for rabbinic ordination. He's maybe you're the secretary, perhaps still, of the Yerushalayim's political party.
Currently a city councilman.
Representing them. And he's also been the rabbi of Kol Rina Synagogue, sometimes known as the Bomb Shelter Synagogue. Maybe we'll even touch on that, why it's called that. Rabbi of Derek Etz Chaim Yeshiva for 8 years and founder of Synergy Training. For 3 years, he was an education officer in the Israeli Army, program director at Gesher, and he's married to Miriam Leibowitz, and they have 5 children. And he has written a blog called Between Heaven and Earth. Again, very interesting topic, and maybe we'll touch on that. He's been featured on The Voice of Israel, as well as in the New York Times, Times of Israel, the Jerusalem Post, Haaretz News, and is particularly active in the community regarding the issue of kosher or kashrut in the Hebrew certificates for restaurants. So maybe that'll be another issue that we'll get onto. So first of all, Rabbi Aharon, I think it'd be very interesting for our viewers to know how you came to Israel and a bit of the background, as to because you originally, your family was originally in the United States, and how you came to live here.
Right. So I was a rabbi's son. My grandfather was an Orthodox rabbi in New York. My father was an Orthodox rabbi in Berkeley, California, and Israel was always part of the conversation in our home. And as the rabbi in a community, a university community. His contract, he said to the board of directors of the synagogue, well, you all get sabbaticals, I should get a sabbatical as well. So we actually had a routine where every 7th year we would spend in Israel. So I spent my third grade year in Israel. And then in high school we came again. And after that, I was about 14 at that time. And at the end of that year, when time came to go back to Berkeley, I was walking with a friend in the old city of Jerusalem, and I said to my friend, I don't want to go back. And I went back to my family, and I said, I asked them.
How old were you then?
I was 15. And I said, listen, can I stay? I really want to stay here. Now Aliyah, which is the term for immigration to Israel, literally translated as ascension, because it's an aspiration of someplace to go, someplace to aspire to rise to, was always in our family conversation. So my family said, okay, I guess we're moving to Israel. I guess we're making Aliyah. So I spent that year, my 11th year of high school, in Israel alone, living with my grandmother and in a boarding school.
Your grandmother was already in Israel?
I had a grandmother and an aunt and uncle, and at that point also most of my friends, my peer group, the people I was connected to were here in Israel. And it wasn't an easy year. As a matter of fact, probably the clique came 7 months in. And if the sabbatical had ended at a different stage, I might have gone back and never come, God forbid. So I've been here since childhood. I really, culturally, I'm at home both in English and in North American culture, and fully at home in Hebrew and in Israeli culture. And and
So
feel.
are there other councillors on the Jerusalem Council, or Anglo, or English speaking?
There are a number of councilmen on the city council who are English speaking. In the current coalition that's governing the city of Jerusalem, I believe I'm the only native-speaking English speaker. I think there is actually one ultra-Orthodox representative who also is English as his mother tongue. And one of the things which I'm very conscious of are the needs of the Anglo community in Jerusalem. Very often a community of immigrants feel disempowered, don't really always know how to access or leverage the system, and that's something which is very, very important to me.
And we really appreciate your work, because one of the issues for Jewish people who are returning to Israel, who are Anglo, is all the forms in Hebrew and all the paperwork they've got to do for the different things, not just for the Aliyah, but also just to live here with bills to pay, and there's a lot. There isn't very much in English in the paperwork system.
Yes, that's true. And what happens is, even if you're capable and are able to navigate that level of getting by in the bank, in the school system, filling out the forms, paying your taxes, you certainly never feel empowered to become part of the process. In other words, there's always a sense of being subject to the system and to the process. And Israel and Jerusalem have a lot to gain from the Anglo community, who come from a Western country with hundreds of years of civil tradition, and Israel is a young state, and I think that the Anglo community have a tremendous amount to contribute. And because they often feel like they're newcomers, they don't always have that voice. So that's a lot of what I'm involved in, is helping them step up and contribute and become part of the conversation, part of the governance system.
Fantastic. And we've also talked in the past, and many of our viewers will be aware of Nefesh Ben Nefesh, who also do quite a lot of work for Anglos to help them assimilate, help them join the community, and help them understand the banking system and tax system and different things like that. Now, when you came here, one of the things that happens when Jewish people or when Israelis come to a certain age is you have to join the army and do military service. So maybe you can tell us a bit about that, because you've made Aliyah, I guess, at this stage, and then you sign up for the army.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Well, after I finished high school, I went to yeshiva, to a religious academy, and for a number of years. And at that point, the time came to decide what sort of military service I was going to choose. There are shortened military services for rabbinical students and other I'd say Talmudic students, and then of course there's the regular mandatory service of 3 years. At that point, I was already very engaged in the dialogue between religious / Orthodox Israelis and secular or non-Orthodox Israelis, and the question of where does the burden of the security of this country fall, sensitized me to the fact that many Orthodox students in religious academies don't do their full service. So
you now coming from a yeshiva where you're studying with people, I guess, of a similar background, and then suddenly you're thrown into the IDF, where there's people from every background.
It's definitely a culture shock, and also having come from the U.S., it was a culture shock. In other words, my friends had grown up surrounded by their father going into reserves or their older siblings, and the whole experience of the army was part and parcel of their childhood. For me, I had been in Israel for 3 or 4 years. The military environment, sometimes Israelis have a reputation for being a little rough around the edges. So you can only imagine what the Israeli military is like, and that was, I forget whether it was mentioned in my biography, but I grew up in Berkeley, California. I grew up in the heart of flower power, the hippie movement, the anti-Vietnam movement. I grew up in Berkeley in the 70s. And Berkeley in the 70s was still a little bit in the 60s. They were a little behind the times. And basic training in the army was a huge challenge. It was a tremendous growth opportunity, but it was a huge challenge. You know, cutting my hair short, which I'd never had my hair cut that short, and being barked at by my officers and not being able to talk back, and of course the physical effort, which in the infantry was significant.
And as well, you are. As you know, our viewers are aware that there is the possibility that you'll be in harm's way, because Israel isn't a country that's, you know, the army is are kind of on standby. It's an army that has to deal with issues, whether that be terrorism or the borders on Gaza and the Golan and in the Negev. So there is the possibility, when you're in the IDF, that you will be in harm's way.
Yes, and I actually served in active service during the Gulf War, and was involved in the military defense in the rear guard, and that was an intense experience. In other words, we were. So I've never been in active combat, but I've been responsible for thousands of soldiers as missiles were falling on Israel, and we were all wearing gas masks, and it was very that in itself was a significant point of connection for me with this country. In other words, I arrived actually during the Lebanon War, and the first Lebanon War, and that was a very distant kind of connection, because I was a kid, I was a youth, and but being part of the military, wearing the uniform, being part of the system, and understanding that the story of security and safety in Israel is not a game. It is very, very real, and until you connect to it on that level. And I'm sure even now, if I were to ever find myself, fighting on the front lines in a war, then all of a sudden that in itself would be an awakening, because some of these things, remain theory until they stare you in the face. So that was very strong. Most of my service, I actually was in education. I was an educational officer, and I was able to steer my military career in a direction in which I had interest. And that was also a very, very significant step for me, because one of the things that I was addressing was the Jewish identity of high-ranking officers in the Israeli army, and how do they draw the connection between their day-to-day military service and the values, the underlying values, which have brought about this miracle which we call Israel.
And how did they receive that? Because we know that Tel Aviv can be very different to Jerusalem. That Jerusalem is primarily a religious city, and Tel Aviv is a very secular city. So how were the Tel Aviv officers with the Jewish identity? Were they more, well, we don't really need this, and we could be doing other things, or?
So the seminar which we ran was a seminar which really, it was a 6-day program, which had 2 days dedicated to democracy, 2 days dedicated to Jewish identity, and 2 days dedicated to Zionism. And the process was designed so that it really allowed space for the issues which are not in consensus in Israeli society. By the way, I think a lot has changed since the 90s, which is where we are right now in my life story, and today, the year 2015. I think that I think Jerusalem is not necessarily a religious city. I feel like there's a more pluralistic environment in Jerusalem today. Tel Aviv also. When I was young, I think that the Israelis of European descent who were not Orthodox were on a direct route to disengaging with their Jewish identity. And that was really the discourse. In other words, is Judaism relevant to me at all as a Zionist Israeli in the 20th century? And I feel like today we're seeing a little bit of a return, not necessarily a return to orthodoxy or religion or observance, but a sense that if you take the Jewish history out of the equation, then it's very hard to explain what we're doing here, and why wouldn't I go somewhere else in the world. And there's a strong desire in that community to rediscover those connections, which I think, by the way, interestingly enough, the Israelis of African descent, whether what we call the Sephardic Jews, Jews from Syria, Morocco, and Egypt, etc. In their communities, whether you were a strictly observant Orthodox or not, the Jewish identity was a given. But the intellectual Europeans who had the tradition of the Enlightenment, which had a profound impact, I know, on Christianity and on Judaism and on the whole world. I think that it's quite remarkable that those communities are finding their way back to Jewish sources and to kind of trying to articulate their connection.
If you've just tuned in, we've got Rabbi Aaron Leibowitz in the studio today. He's a Jerusalem councilman, and we're learning about your background. So you were in the military, and then you started, or we can speed up and go up to the yeshiva days, and you're the director of Sulam Yaakov Yeshiva. So tell us a bit about how that started and why you started yeshiva.
Okay, so Sulam Yaakov literally translated as Jacob's Ladder. And Jacob's Ladder, if people who remember their Bible well will remember that it's a dream of Jacob, and it's a dream which describes a ladder which is firmly planted on the ground, and its top reaches the heavens. And that was really the vision of our study community, which was founded as a grassroots community leadership development project. What we did is we identified 15 of the members of the community who had potential for lay leadership, and we recruited them to begin their daily routine together in study. So this was a little bit of a different model than the traditional model. The traditional yeshiva model or study environment, religious school model, the schools which I studied in were schools which were preparatory. In other words, they preceded your career or they preceded life. And over here, what we were looking for was a model which integrated study into ongoing personal and professional development. So these were or still are working men who come together daily and begin their day in prayer and study, and also creative work, and we empower them as lay leaders in the community. And this is also unique, as opposed, I think, to most rabbinic schools which train rabbis to go out to the field. That's not what Sulam Yaakov is about. Sulam Yaakov is about identifying in the heart of Jerusalem, the neighborhood of Nachlaot where I live, which is very much the city center.
And we're not far from the market.
And not far from the market, not far from the old city, not far from the Temple Mount. And to take that community and empower a level of lay leadership. So the cynics say, as a rabbi in the community, I was just looking to recruit people to do the work for me, because that's really what happened over the course of 7 years. We ordained 21 rabbis in the community, and out of those 21 rabbis, some moved on to other locations and became professional rabbis. But the critical mass continued to work as businessmen or computer programmers, etc.
Now, I heard, Aaron, there was a shortage of rabbis. Is that true?
I would not say today there's a shortage of rabbis. There might be a shortage of good rabbis, and I hope that nobody's upset by my saying so.
Is that in the sense of training that you
It's in the sense of the Jewish people being at a time of tremendous accelerated change. I think the world is at a time of tremendous accelerated change. I think that traditional views and values are being challenged, and I think that those challenges are profound and are meant to open our eyes in deeper ways. And when you were challenged in that way, so the simple solutions are either to be taken over by that Western world, or to retreat into a more narrow fundamentalist which would leave me asking, well, why then has God brought these challenges? So I really believe that the challenges that the Western culture, Western world is posing before us are meant to push us to deeper levels of understanding and insight. And in Sulam Yaakov, we're really trying to promote rabbinic leadership that aren't oriented around fear, or are oriented only around fear of God, and not fear of the other, and not fear of being challenged by ideas, not fear of questions. And part of what I believe is that people who are working in the world and interacting with the world and not secluded in ivory towers of religious leadership are actually well fit for that challenge, which is the more important challenge of our generation.
Now, is that a big job? A very interesting point, and to reach out to other communities, because the history of the Jewish people has been that since the exile they've been in the dispersion in the diaspora, and they're now fantastically with the fulfillment of the Bible coming back, and we've seen that. We've been to Ben Gurion with Nefesh Ben Nefesh and seen the Jewish people coming back. But it's the fear that in reaching out, there could be the assimilation and we could disappear into that community, or is there some fears that we need to have some kind of safeguard of Torah teaching and of our synagogues, etc., etc.?
So, I first of all, I think that what you're describing is to a large extent is the psychology of the ultra-Orthodox, more fundamentalistic camp or faction in Jewish Orthodoxy. The communities where you see the gentlemen wearing black hats that look like the gangsters from the 20s, or furry black hats, and those communities are really carrying a sense of siege and responding by closing the ranks, building insular communities. That's not my path, but I think that if we look at the Jewish people as a whole and speak about a potential immune system or sequestered safety, so perhaps that plays a role in the process, having that as well. Really, what I've absorbed from my teachers, my father, my rabbis, my role models, is a different path, and it's a path of questioning, of open thinking. It's a path of orthodoxy, and I say that in terms of an orientation of humility towards our tradition.
And do you think that's easier coming from the United States, where it's a country which is multicultural, where people tend to reach out to each other, whereas from the Eastern Europe was in the Russia, because of the pogroms and everything, the communities had to, for safety, had to be more insular. So when they came to live in Israel, they kind of brought this with them.
Yeah, I think that, and I also think the United States, again, the United States has had hundreds of years to develop a very powerful, a very strong level of public discourse, the disagreements in the American civil society are are extremely harsh, and yet almost all of the process is conducted through a political system and through dialogue and through peaceful resolution of those disagreements. That's not to say that there aren't outbreaks of violence. We saw outbreaks of racial violence in the United States, recently. But I spoke before of what I feel are some of the gifts that the American Aliyah, that the American immigration to Israel has to offer society here, and part of it is that. Part of it is as you noted, we grew up in a multicultural society. I grew up as a minority in an environment where I not once in my childhood experienced anti-Semitism. I felt held as a minority, and that experience is it really imparts a sense of safety, and a lot of what I'm speaking of, goes to to what extent do you feel safe? Because as soon as you feel like that you're facing an existential threat, And I feel like, unfortunately, Israel is finding itself once again in that kind of a reality. Then, of course, the fight or flight, psychology kicks in.
And do you think that you're in your work with the Jerusalem Council that you can reach out to them?
So really what we believe in, I represent a party which is called the Jerusalemite Party, Yerushalmim. And we call ourselves the Jerusalemite Party because as opposed to the classic sectorial Jerusalem politics, we really view ourselves as bringing together the different communities under one umbrella, under one tent, to speak about the common good. And in that respect, really, right now we are very much in search of, and with partial success, those ultra-Orthodox Haredi Jerusalem residents or citizens who are able to take part in a conversation about the common good. In other words, too often. This is true, by the way, in the Arab-Israeli conflict, and this is true in the tension between secular and Orthodox Jews in Israel. Too often, people engage in these processes, and they really harbor this dream that tomorrow morning they're going to wake up, and the other side is going to just disappear, and they're going to be gone. And my understanding of how God speaks to us is that He expects us to look reality hard in the face, and hear His voice in that. So really what we were trying to do is call on all sides to understand and appreciate that there is somebody else here, somebody who's different, and he's not going to wake up tomorrow morning and disappear. And it's in all of our interest to begin to look out for each other and understand that apparently there's something that we have to learn from each other as well.
Thank you so much for coming on the program today. We hope to get you on next week as well.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Rabbi Aharon Leibowitz. It's been great, fantastic to listen, to your background and what you're doing and your work in the community. If you'd like to email us, don't forget you can email info@inthelastdays.com and visit the website www.inthelastdays.com. It's because of your support that we're able to do this program. And don't forget, we're living in the last days.
You've been watching In the Last Days, a TV program with Martin and Natalie Blackham, the program that looks at Israel and the end times with teaching from a Hebraic perspective. If you would like to financially support the program or find out about conferences, meetings, or ministry products, then please contact us with the details on your screen. Visit our easy-to-use website at www.inthelastdays.com and register for our free e-newsletter. Get the latest news from Israel, product information, online video teaching, or watch today's TV program at a time that's convenient to you. Thank you again, friends and partners, for making this program possible.
See you same time, same station for the next program from In the Last Days.